All right, I briefly want to show you what's happening in the economy right now based on the Fed tools that we've talked about. So the Federal Reserve here, it says, is taking actions to support the flow of credit to households and businesses. They want to keep money moving. So they're moving to push money out into the economy. And they're doing that by purchasing Treasury securities or buying bonds. And when they do that, that puts money into the economy and it lowers the Fed fund rate, which is the rate at which banks borrow from each other. So I want to show you what happened to the market here. The effective Fed fund rate, this is their target. It may adjust a little bit, but you see it had climbed as the economy was improving. They were raising it at their every 6 weeks or so meeting. They began to cut it because there were some concerns about economic growth. They cut it at their regularly scheduled March meeting, and then the coronavirus happened, and you see that they slashed it from 1% to 0.05%. So you can see where they cut the Fed funds rate. The other thing they do is cut the interest rates that they have. So they wanted to encourage banks to be able to borrow from the Federal Reserve. And so you can see that they cut the interest rates that they have here. They had raised the discount rate as we recovered from the recession of 2009, and it was up at 3%. So this was the rate at which you would have to borrow from the Fed. Banks want to borrow from each other, and the Fed wanted to encourage banks to borrow from each other. So you can see that it was a little bit cheaper in June of 2009 to borrow from a bank. It's more expensive here. But now they have cut the discount rate with the advent of the coronavirus. They've cut it to 0.25%. So it's still cheaper to borrow from another bank at the Fed funds rate, but not by much. And they're really encouraging banks to feel comfortable borrowing from them. And they encourage JP Morgan Chase to say that they would borrow from the Federal Reserve, which they did. The interest rate on excess reserves. So if you have extra money sitting around, you want to put it in your account at the Fed, kind of like a savings account. They were paying up to 3% for that uh, in the summer of 2019. They were cutting that with some concerns about a recession, and they cut it to 0.10. Interest rate on required reserves also had been up high and was cut tremendously low. The other thing that the Federal Reserve is doing is taking 2.3 trillion in loans to support the economy. They made it really clear that they can't just give you money. The Federal Reserve doesn't work like that. They're a bank. They don't hand you money. They said that's the job of the president and Congress, but they are going to give up to 2.3 trillion in loans in order to help us get out of this. So those loans will have to be repaid, but they are low interest, and it's putting money out into the economy at a time where regular banks are not as willing to loan.